Thanks very much, Steve. You may call me, refer to me as His Holiness from now on. It'll be okay. It's a real delight to be here with Chad Dickerson. And here's the transition between what we've been hearing so far this morning, what I hope we'll hear in the next 19 minutes. We've heard very intelligent discussions of why things are difficult to do in national politics, combined with assertions that in general the United States still works, still has resilience. We're going to hear some illustrations of that actual resilience, what it means, the kinds of things we're doing. So let's start. How many people here actually have shopped with Etsy? A lot of people have. How many people have sold for Etsy? A smaller number, and maybe that will change. So tell us, for people who haven't sold on it yet, people in the audience who are watching, what is Etsy and why does it matter?
Sure. So Etsy is a marketplace for unique goods, vintage items, and craft supplies. We've been around since 2005. Just to give you some numbers, there are 1 million sellers around the world, selling in 200 countries. Last year, there was $1.35 billion with a B sold on Etsy. We're a 600-person company based in Brooklyn. And we really see Etsy as this leading indicator for a new kind of economy that's about making things, that's about self-determination, self-reliance. And as I was saying to Jim, I think it is really an antidote to kind of what you're seeing with politics. It's about people in local communities doing what Americans and others have always done, and that's making beautiful things.
And I'll spend just 10 seconds saying this is just the kind of thing that my wife Deb and I have been seeing around the country as we've been traveling for our American Future series of cities where people are starting up businesses. We're meeting in D.C. with a largely policy-oriented crowd. We're used to thinking of job creation here, of economic trends in the largest scale, a giant factory that opens or closes, factories that go to China or Brazil or whatever. Why does the sort of small enterprise that you are connecting and representing, why should we care about it?
Sure. I mean, number one, we're seeing a large number of people making a living on Etsy and working full-time. So 18% of sellers on Etsy work full-time. We're also seeing this reemergence of manufacturing in a way that you may not think about. And I should tell some stories.
Yeah, we have the illustrated part here, which is really interesting.
Go to the slides. So these cufflinks are from a shop, Brass and Chain, which is based in Ohio. I'm actually wearing some right now. They make customized they built a very successful business creating these custom cufflinks. So this Allison was scaling her business and was working 18 hours a day, and she noticed that there was a factory across town in Fall River, Massachusetts, and she went to the factory, literally knocked on the door, talked to the owner of the factory. The factory had been a huge employer in the area in the 80s, but was really not going very well. And she talked to Jimmy Petroso, the owner, and he started helping her make these superhero capes and scale up her business. So he started hiring people, her sales went up, and this is happening in the United States, here in America. When you think about the Apple revolution, the iPhone revolution, you need a place to put your iPhone for charging and such. And so there's an entire economy on Etsy of handmade iPhone case and chargers and that sort of thing. So the shop here is Magzilla, and Margaret, who runs the shop out of Pasadena, California, has built a really amazing business making these items. I have one on my desk. See.
It creeps in.
A lot of things intersect here. This is from a shop called Milk and Honey Luxuries, based out of Virginia. Sarah, the proprietor, makes what you see here, silverware with stamped images on them, or stamped messages. We actually reached out to our sellers. We're very pro-net neutrality, and we asked them to make goods to show Congress and policymakers in the FCC that we really believed in open internet. So Sarah was in nursing school and started doing this on the side as kind of a stress relief. Her business grew so much that she quit nursing school. She got a wholesale deal with Nordstrom, and her husband, who works in finance, quit to help her do her job. So I think we're building a beautiful world when women making things are pulling their husbands out of finance jobs. Yes, that's the world I want to live in. That's the world I am living in.
Yeah.
Wood goods, and the proprietor, a woman named Erin, and her husband in Chicago started making these desks from reclaimed wood, which you can see here. And the baskets here, which you might recognize from high school lockers and that sort of thing, they were sourcing them from secondhand stores. The demand got so high that they couldn't source enough of these baskets, so they called up the original manufacturer in Chicago and asked for them to make a run of these baskets and spin up more production. So, in Chicago, we're seeing something that started out as a hobby is actually contributing to manufacturing jobs and supporting, in this case, a manufacturing outfit that was 100 years old and needed more business. So this is really the economy we see. When we look at the internet or look at the political challenges in the United States and all the issues and all the sniping, what we see is when people self-organize, they use the internet to connect with each other, and they work with each other, then the economy works.
Great. So I think people can envision transformation when it affects them, and they have a hard time when it doesn't. People in D.C. understand the transforming political effect of being able to raise money online. When a recent conference here, we had Travis from Uber. People in Washington can understand Uber because they take it often. The maker movement, many people in big service sector cities like this have a hard time taking seriously.
Right.
Why should the maker movement be taken? What is it, and why should it be taken seriously?
So I'm going to make an analogy here. How many of you have heard of the Homebrew Computer Club? Great. So the Homebrew Computer Club was a group that met in the Bay Area in the 70s, and it was a group of people who traded supplies and tips, and they were basically making computers. Homebrew Computer Club. People who went to that meeting included people like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. And it was kind of a subculture, and if you were outside of that subculture, you would look at it and think it was somewhat trivial. They were doing phone phreaking and all kinds of hackers kind of stuff. It was a little bit of a fringe movement. But that was really, the Homebrew Computer Club was really the seed of the personal computing revolution. What we're seeing today is that there are literally tens of thousands of homebrew computer clubs. They're called Etsy teams, and these are self-organized groups of sellers who meet together and in communities all around the world, and they do things very much like the Homebrew Computer Club. They trade tips about making, and from the outside it may look like a hobby, but when you look at the stories that I told you, we're seeing that it's emerging as a real vocation and a real way for people to make money. So anything that looks like a hobby in the beginning often turns into a bigger movement, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Right, and there's an analogy too with the craft brew movement, the literally homebrew brewing movement, which has become a genuine business. You've written about the Etsy economy on your site. If things go the way you hope and think they should over the next 5 or 10 years, what would the Etsy economy look like and mean?
Yeah, so our mission is to reimagine commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world. And so it's not just about the buying and selling of things, it's about bringing that personal connection back to commerce. And so when you look at the broader landscape and the traditional retail landscape, it's all about price and convenience and next day delivery. And many of the companies who are successful in that ecosystem are all about squeezing suppliers, going to the lowest cost labor, that sort of thing. The Etsy economy that we see is really about creating an economy where everyone wins at every step of the way. So the way Etsy works, we're obviously an internet platform, but when you sell something on Etsy, Etsy's cut is 3.5%. The artist's cut is 96.5%. And all the money is going back to communities everywhere. There's not like a great sucking sound to Bentonville, Arkansas, for example. Not to name names. And we really see this, our 3.5%, as Etsy has become more successful, that fee has not been raised, really since the company started. So the Etsy economy we see is a really fair economy. It's also getting into offline retail. So I mentioned Sarah from Milk and Honey Luxuries. We've also built a wholesale program, so boutiques and retailers are now buying from Etsy sellers, and we're brokering the wholesale deal, and again, 3.5%. So the Etsy economy is really about, instead of looking at the economy in sort of a zero-sum way, like how can I win, how can Etsy win? It's how can Etsy do well, how can our suppliers do well, how can the retailers do well, and everybody take a fair cut, and then everyone does well. And it's just a different view.
You've also written about the ways in which the virtual communications of the internet age can facilitate real localism, real activity, real human connections between people. Tell us about how you think that can work.
Sure. So I mentioned briefly Etsy teams, and the thing to understand about Etsy is it's real people on the ground. In New York, there are dozens of these Etsy teams who meet. To give you kind of a visual sense of kind of how pervasive Etsy sellers are, there are actually more Etsy sellers in the 5 boroughs in New York than there are yellow cabs. So it's a lot of people. And we've done things, I think a lot of internet companies out there are kind of fighting regulation, fighting the government. It's very adversarial. We really look at government as another opportunity to partner, again, that fulfilling and lasting world. So we worked with local civic organizations, local government, in a program that we call Craft Entrepreneurship, where we're working with our Etsy teams, again, the Etsy sellers on the ground, to teach disadvantaged communities how to start businesses on Etsy. And those classes, again, being taught by the sellers in our community, not by Etsy, they're meeting in places like the Dallas Public Library, the Chattanooga Public Library. So we're an internet company that cares about libraries and civic institutions. And I think, to the earlier question about Etsy economy, that's really what we envision and what we're seeing happen, and we think it's possible. And it's a great alternative to things like cable news and politics.
Right. So I have to ask you one other policy question before some more transcendental ones. When organizations are growing or businesses are growing like yours, their view to the government is either they want the government somehow to support them, somehow to stop oppressing or hindering them, or to get out of their way.
Right.
And what is your view towards government in general of those three?
So we're not, it's a little bit of each. I think it's more, I'll add a fourth option. I think it's more a plea for understanding. We want government and the media and everyone to understand that the work that these largely women are doing, 88% of sellers on Etsy are women, is legitimate. It's not just a hobby. These are real businesses. And everything from how you support business with internet taxation, like free trade. We have sellers shipping all over the world. I think in our minds, it's less about thinking, how can we lure 1,000-person factories to the United States. It's about, which is still important, but how do we support these small entrepreneurs and help them be successful in all of these policy areas? So it's more about shifting the sort of understanding.
So I'm talking now about culture. You've worked, as you say, a lot in the Bay Area during the sort of glory days of the dot-coms. You're working now in Brooklyn, a famously creative area.
Yes.
How would you both compare the New York and California startup cultures and derive lessons from the two of them to other parts of the country?
Right.
Even DC.
So this is more my personal point of view. In my intro, you heard that I was an English lit major. I focused on Shakespeare. I went to work at the Raleigh News and Observer in 1993, which is the first daily newspaper on the web in the United States. And there I got really interested in the internet, and I taught myself how to code. So just on a personal level, I think coding is really important, but also liberal arts. And taking a big step back, when I think about sort of lasting ideas in the world, the programming languages that people were learning in 1993 are mostly forgotten. Macbeth is still remembered.
Yeah.
So I think that, thank you. So, what does this have to do with New York, Silicon Valley culture? I really personally enjoy New York because I think it's more of a balanced culture. I don't believe that technology and software is going to solve all of the world's problems. I think it can solve a lot of problems, and it's very much an enabler. Working in a creative company like Etsy that serves creative people, I think working in a place where you have everything from theater to art to the opera to amazing authors, I think the cultural environment in New York is really second to none, and for that reason, I really prefer building a company like Etsy in a place like New York. I think, obviously Silicon Valley is a one-industry town, but it's a big, big industry.
Sort of like DC.
Yes. So on a personal level, I think a really creative, diverse company, it's better to build in New York.
Yeah. And so just to ask the underside of that, both for all of their strengths, both New York, especially Brooklyn, and the Bay Area, they're seen as fostering and rewarding a certain class of people at the expense of many others. How will your company, the Etsy economy, these regions, build an embracing, thick middle-class economy? How does that factor into your concerns?
Sure. Yeah, I think we look at, Etsy, the platform is really all about bringing opportunity to a diverse group of people. So I think really the proof is in the pudding. We're seeing in the cities that I mentioned in our craft entrepreneurship program, we have our local teams supporting people in those communities. With urban wood goods, for example, we have our sellers as they scale up. They're making more money and doing well, but they're also submitting orders to smaller manufacturers in their area, which is creating jobs. So I really think everything we do is, because it is based on that principle of fairness that I talked about, everything we do is intended to build a really healthy economy. And again, the mission about more fulfilling and lasting world, we're not saying, Etsy, the place to sell more stuff. We want all of the mechanisms in the company to make the world better. Not in the trite Silicon Valley, make the world better, because I think that can be overused, but making things, selling things, promoting community, those are things that really do make the world better.
In the work you do and the technology you put together, what is the part of it that's difficult that nobody from the outside fully appreciates? Every job has something that's harder than anybody on the outside knows.
Yes.
What is it for you?
I think in talent. There's so much happening. A new app launches every day, like dozens of apps, hundreds of apps. And there are people building those things. And so assembling a company when everyone is looking for the same talent and running that company is really, really difficult. I think because my background was in technology, and I know how the internet works and how all that kind of thing, there are some days I wake up and I'm surprised that the internet actually works. Because in some ways it's very patched together. So I think the hard part of the job is just every day, 24/7, making the company work technology-wise and talent-wise.
We have 1 minute left. Again,
Sure.
We're here in D.C. We've heard about all the things that are difficult here. If you were plummeted into some governmental organization now and could apply what you've learned to making things function better here, what would it be?
I'm going to have to pause for a moment, even though we have a minute. I think it's really for me, it's really about addressing fear. I think that there's a fear of technology in Washington, what I've seen. There's kind of a superstructure of government contractors and all this sort of thing. What I would do is really change the way software is built in the government to be more like what we're doing in New York, more like Silicon Valley. And I think it's notable to me that, I hate to bring up healthcare.gov, but when you look at healthcare.gov, it took a group of Silicon Valley people, top technologists, to come in and fix it. Like, let's build things the right way so that those people don't have to come in and fix it.
With those encouraging words, please join me in thanking Chad Dickerson.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.